Thank you for auditing Professor Skye's Record Review, the always positive new music review show hosted by a French professor who today will be reviewing R.A.P. Ferreira and Scallops Hotel's album, Bob's Son. Before I get to the album, I need to do two things. One, I need to take a bite of an oatmeal cookie. This is a cookie that I made. Tastes like music. I'm going to explain that in a second. Actually, now I need a sip of coffee. It's a very dry cookie. I followed this recipe, but I didn't have the right kind of oatmeal. So it's a very dry cookie. Before I get more into oatmeal cookies and why did I make them for this video, I want to talk about my long history and my thoughts on the relationship between rap and poetry. And is there a connection, and should we emphasize that connection? My story goes back over 20 years ago when I defended my undergraduate thesis. So I wrote a thesis in 99-2000 all about a single French rap group, okay? At the time, this wasn't done that often. It was kind of a bold choice, and my thesis was okay. Looking back at it, it was not my best work, but still it was interesting. And as I defended my thesis, all of my French professors were there, sitting down in a row, judging my work and commenting on what I did. I think I got an A- or a B+. It wasn't my best work, like I said, a lot of flaws in my French. But there's one woman who I have since gone on to read her scholarship, and she is a brilliant scholar. But her comment enraged me then, and it enrages me to this day. I just finished talking for over 20 minutes about this 100-page work that I made about hip-hop and rap and French rap and its relationship to identity and all these things that were very important to me. And she raises her hand and says, "You know what? This is just like Rimbaud. That's what this is like. This is like the 19th century French poet Arthur Rimbaud." And she sort of like made a little dance, like she started like reading off some lines from Rimbaud and dancing around. And I smiled and said, "Yeah, it is. Just give me the grade, give me the grade." But let me tell you why that upset me. I think there is a current, and you see this a lot in academia, where I live. Not in macadamia, the nuts that I did not put in my cookies. In academia, that was a really bad joke. This is why I need to write scripts and not just have notes. In academia, I often feel this need to justify hip-hop music, to justify rap. And putting it in the context of, oh, it's a young person who's doing some spoken word, it's poetry, I can like it. It gives me permission. It excuses the music. So for that reason, I have basically always, whenever people have tried to tell me that, oh, the only way to understand rap is to understand poetry, just said no. It's its own thing. It doesn't need something else to justify its existence or to justify its greatness. Which makes an album like Bob's Son by R.A.P. Ferreira so interesting. Because this is rap that wants to be poetry. All of a sudden, all of my hesitation, all of my anger goes away. Because if rap wants to be poetry, then it can be poetry. That's the thing, is that the more I study hip-hop, the more I do this channel, the more I branch out and study things from all over the spectrum of hip-hop, I'm learning to appreciate the amazing spectrum of emotions and intellect that is on display throughout all of hip-hop. It really is the most expressive art form that exists right now. Maybe that's just because of the sonic textures that are available. Maybe it's because of the amount of words that can be said. But last week I reviewed Playboi Carti. This week I'm reviewing R.A.P. Ferreira. They absolutely are on the same spectrum, are the same thing happening, just expressing completely different emotions, completely different approaches to how to use this music to express one's artistry. I love hip-hop when it is a poet's tool. When it wants to be poetry, it should be. It must serve the artist, not excuse the art. So with that in mind, I get to unleash all of the poetry that I've studied in my life and my thoughts on poetry on this album, on this very worthy, very listenable, very enjoyable album. I mean, it came out on January 1st, so it's definitely the album of the year so far, but it will probably end up being a contender by the end of the year. It is that good. I should say that I've never heard a single minute of R.A.P. Ferreira or his alter ego Scallops Son or his alter ego Milo or his other groups, Nom de Rap. I did a lot of research for this, mostly research on poetry, but I did a lot of research for this video. I know nothing about him except his small bio on Wikipedia. So I want to have that to be clear, because I'm not coming at this as some like seasoned hip-hop head who's steeped in the underground, has been following this cat for years. This is just totally new to me. Now, it turns out that this entire album, and he makes this very clear in an artist statement on Bandcamp, is dedicated to the poet Bob Kaufman, who is a very interesting figure who I knew virtually nothing about before I started doing this video. I spent the last 3 days doing nothing but reading about beat poets and reading about Bob Kaufman and trying to understand what R.A.P. Ferreira is doing. It's that rich of an album. So Bob Kaufman was this like beat poet. He actually invented the term beatnik. He was half black, half Jewish, a very strange, sort of antisocial, borderline, misanthropic figure who like took a vow of silence for 10 years, but then he also didn't like writing down his poetry. So how are you going to be a poet who doesn't write down your poems and doesn't speak, right? He very much was a person who just lived, and poetry was a part of his life, but it wasn't that he dedicated himself to making the most poetry and leaving a mark in poetry. It turns out, where is he the most popular? Where is Bob Kaufman most popular? He's most popular in France. That's how I'd ever heard of him in the first place, because if you're in poetic circles in France and you mention American poets, and you're saying, oh, Ginsberg and Hughes, and they will often say, "Et Bob Kaufman?" He is in fact often called the Black American Rimbaud. This guy coming back again. It's quite an interesting idea. Now, Bob Kaufman apparently sort of wanted to be forgotten. Like, he wasn't about his legacy. He wasn't about being remembered forever. He was a poet, but not wrapped in the pretensions of poetry, not in the concept of the ancient concepts of, oh, and what I will give will last forever, and life is but a breath. So it's fascinating to have this album by R.A.P. Ferreira in which he completely dedicates to the memory and the work of Bob Kaufman. This is, I think, just as good as reading Bob Kaufman himself. So many of the themes are so well integrated, is so well said. The spirit of Bob Kaufman, as much as I can possibly understand it, as just some dude sitting in his salon. We actually call this like the rumpus room. Some dude sitting in his rumpus room can be, right? But it really does seem to encapsulate that. Now, there is a difficulty here. Bob Kaufman is a beat poet. He uses a lot of symbolism, surrealism. Things don't always make sense, okay? Already, I hit you with the oatmeal cookie. That doesn't make sense. You might see behind me the Abominist manifesto. That I don't think make much sense either. I also have a history of teaching poetry, okay? When you teach French, you get to teach poetry. And like I often think of poetry as being in sort of 3 different levels. You know, there's the easy stuff, right? Like Renaissance poetry in France, like Ronsard, right? Ronsard, if you're speaking English. He wrote sonnets, so you can break down the form of sonnets. He wrote about the preciousness of time and about the eternity of love, and he used decasyllable, and he used all these things that you can break down, and you can ask questions and get answers, okay? As a teacher, you want to ask questions and get answers. So students are very resistant to poetry, just like the public, I believe, will be resistant to R.A.P. Ferreira because it's so poetic and so inscrutable. But Ronsard, the sonnets, no problem. The next level down, you get to someone like Baudelaire, a 19th century poet who is still very much anchored in a lot of the ancient traditions, but mixes it in with some modernity, says some things that are a little bit weird that escape immediate understanding, but can still basically be decoded. And then we get to people like Rimbaud, or like Mallarmé up there, poets who, when I teach them, I never ask a single goddamn question of my students, not a single one. I force them to read it, I force them to tell me what they think, what do they understand, and then I just back the hell off, because I'm not interested in making them have the torture that I had as an undergrad, trying to explain what all these things mean and come up with concrete answers when there are no concrete answers. Poetry, like visual art, reached a point where it was no longer necessary to have concrete single answers. And it's in this context, after this, that the beats arrived, and that their poetry arrived, and that things did not always have a direct, understandable answer. This is part of the reason why I used to say when I was younger and stupider, you can't teach poetry. You have to feel poetry. No, you can teach poetry, but you just can't teach unrealistic expectations. So I'm not going to be deciphering Rap Ferreira. I have some pretty interesting conclusions, I think, that have come from my reading, but that is not the idea. In order to truly honor this album and what it's trying to do, it sort of actually needs me to shut the hell up and for you to stop watching this video. Because what I'm doing is trying to dissect something beautiful, right? I'm taking a beautiful flower and I'm like taking out all the veins and trying to show it to you. But still, musically, this is an album, okay? This is music. This is not just poetry. But I'm not really going to be studying it or presenting it to you primarily in the context of an album. Now, musically, it's an excuse, like the music is an excuse for the voice is an excuse for the words, okay? But still, what's interesting is it's like a very well-produced album. It's got a very specific feel. I suppose it could be classified as lo-fi, kind of junky sounds, weird samples, kind of like harps and pianos and like samples that are like tuned up or tuned down, a little bit warbly. What I think is interesting is that the beat poets and jazz were just deadlocked. They were just completely connected. Not deadlocked, that's not the right word. They were interlocking, right? Jazz and beat poetry went totally together. This album makes a really good argument that hip-hop, or rap, let's just call it rap. We don't have to make it sound nicer than, we don't have to justify it, rap music. That rap music and poetry can go together. And that even appears to be one of the primary themes of the album, is a kind of belief that rap and poetry can go together. In that way, it sort of displaces jazz. It's often jazzy as well. A lot of the sounds sound kind of jazzy, and it's sort of intentionally discordant. At times, like the songs will like break in half, and there'll be two different parts, and the parts don't necessarily go together. There's something very avant-garde about the production here, and it seems to be that it's almost trying to displace jazz and poetry. It's like honoring jazz and poetry, and multiple times it explicitly does that. But it's also taking the feeling that kind of loose jazz can give you and just killing it, cannibalizing it, taking a couple samples, taking a couple ideas, and now it's rap. And I think this is great, because jazz is a wonderful art form, but it's largely moribund, and I think that we need to have another way of expressing poetry through music, and this appears to be the most effective case of doing it. Now, when I was growing up, there was a group called the Disposable Heroes of Hip-Hoperacy, who did an entire album with William Burroughs, the great poet, author, junkie, and it was cool, but it always kind of felt off. It felt too forced. This album doesn't feel forced at all in its integration of beat poetics and rap music. And if that's not interesting to you, then I don't know why you watch my channel. This is exactly the kind of thing that I like to talk about and I like to really get into. Apparently the entire thing is produced by him as well. He has all these different pseudonyms. He's from Maine. Like Maine? Like my buddy Brad, he lives in Maine. I was like, do you know where Biddeford is? He's like, yeah, it's 15 minutes from here. So that's also interesting, that there's this kind of like, you know, the poet as an outsider, unconcerned with society. You can't be much more of a not concerned with society than living in Maine as a rap artist, okay? But he's able to do it. And maybe that's why, when I said it to him, when I talked to my friend Brad about this album, he was like, well, you have to make sure you pronounce it Scallops Hotel, and that's a very good name for a Maine rapper. So here we go. We're heading into the album. I will touch on the music from time to time. Listening to it second and third time, I realized I am selling the music short. He is a very good producer. But what I really want to do is get into the words. Now, I'm going to do something I've never done on this channel before. I actually did a full analyse de texte, a full textual analysis of this album. What you see here are my notes. I printed out every single lyric and I annotated them. And I took notes and I made thoughts and I tried to even come up with some kind of code like you see here, where I would say if it was talking about poetics or rap form or blackness or society, and I'd make music notes in pink. I would go through all of this trying to understand it because it is a very difficult album to understand. Much like This Time It Is Like Hambo. Okay, This Time It Is, where there's a lot of symbolism, there's a lot of intentional obscurity in here. So I'm going to do my best to break this down. So I'm just going to go through my notes with you right now. I think it's going to be fun. I think you're going to like it, but I don't know. Maybe you don't. Feel free to comment or like or subscribe or whatever. So the album begins with a instrumental track, basically, called Battle Report, with someone just saying, "Play Bob's Son," over and over again. This is important because it's a goofy song that sets a light tone. There is something about beat poetry and Bob Kaufman that is playful and serious at the same time. By starting off an album with someone just going, "Play Bob's Son," over and over again, there you go. The rap landscape is filled with albums about people saying their father's name or their name and their son's name, right? Like I am this person's son, or this person is my son. It's interesting that this is about a spiritual father, the spiritual fatherhood of Bob Kaufman, okay? The first main track is called The Kauf Bomber's Return. Again, with this playfulness, Bob Kaufman and Kauf Bomber are very related poetically, just in terms of the way the sounds are. So this is talking about the return of Bob Kaufman, who died many years ago. And they call him the last Kauf Bomber, so as though he's really continuing on this tradition. Now in the first verse, you'll see here, I circled this, and they make a reference. First to get cut probably grew the tallest, off-center bald spot, Rasheed Wallace. Now this is funny because, like if you get cut when you're tall, then you might get a bald spot. And then Rasheed Wallace, the basketball player, is famous for having an off-center bald spot. So it's a very kind of like rap-style verse, right? A rap-style line, right? Making a contemporary reference. This does not feel like eternal poetry, right? We're going to get into this punchline later. I just want you to keep that in mind. Rasheed Wallace, okay? And then moving on, there's some of the very few direct references to this contemplation of blackness and blackness in society. Black is a function of nothingness. Black is closing your eyes post-concussion. It's Black Orpheus. Of course it is. Of course it is. So sort of Black Orpheus as a poet, as a black poet, sort of reclaiming that it's not just this absence, but it's also something else. And then it moves on, just in this one verse, we have all these things that happen. We have a society. When good ideas are felonies, that's called living in a society. It's then followed up with a line about, what did your dough make you? Have you had muffins? So the idea that money is not worth it. What is worth it is what you can make from it. I'm turning the page here. Then in the middle of the song, there's this weird instrumental break with someone singing, "The Kauf Bomber has returned to us again." And it sounds actually slightly Frank Zappa-ish, more than jazz-ish. And then he just keeps on going on with this line, "Frankie little MCs must get dissed." So Frank is a term which I believe Bob Kaufman invented. So it's a weird mixture of like a standard rap insult mixed in with a beat poet term. Very conscious. Rap and this album really could have been called Rap and Poetry. It really could be. I'm going to get into that in a second more. And there is where he says, "I am back up on my oatmeal cookies." What is the deal with oatmeal cookies? I'll have you know, I sent a direct message to R.A.P Ferreira asking him if he had an oatmeal cookie recipe. Looking back at it, that is the stupidest thing I could have possibly asked an artist who made such a great product. Hopefully he will see this video and understand that I'm going other places. But I thought it'd be funny if he had a recipe, because oatmeal cookies, I'll talk about what they represent soon. I don't think there's one answer, but I think I have an answer. He talks about not graduating college, and then just ends it with, "I'm back up on my oatmeal cookies, back up on my oatmeal cookies," and he's singing and he's catchy. Very rarely he will start singing one of his lines, and when he sings, it's catchy, it's funny, it's infectious, it is very personable, right? So dry. I used the steel cut oats. Didn't have anything else in the house. I think there's an interesting idea behind this oatmeal cookie, which is a little bit followed up by the next song, "Yam Ships and Flaxseed." Now, if you've been following the intersection of rap and poetry, you obviously know a lot about Kendrick Lamar and his attempts to sort of bridge the gap in another way. and in particular his insistence on the figure of yams in his album To Pimp a Butterfly, is seen as connected to the larger black literary movements and the representation of yams as being a symbol of success and a symbol of sort of African pride, a very kind of complicated food stuff. I do think it's intentional that lyrically, yam ships follow right after the oatmeal cookies. I think that these are seen as, supposed to be understood as a spiritual food. I don't think it's the same kind of spiritual food as yams, but I think we're supposed to understand spiritual food. So, Yam Shakes Flaxseed has a nice kind of haunting voice sample. This whole song is a weird mixture of the poetic and the rap, like just it's rap bragging, talking about how great he is. Cool kind of interlude with a broken piano. And I believe that the second verse is entirely about creating a verse, about writing lyrics on a computer. Okay? So let's see how right I am here. Okay? So he talks about spamming Control V. No goalie, no roadies. Yes, pain comes in dreams. Ooh, 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 ooh. Yes, pain comes in dreams. Yes, pain comes in dreams. Yes, pain comes in dreams. Ooh, 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 ooh. Why am I doing that? Well, he just said that he's spamming Control V in the lyric. So I think this is intentional. He is spamming Control V while writing a verse. And it's about this weird difficulty of trying to figure out how to write in a computer and how to have this Control V, this paste function, and how to use it properly so that like you don't write poorly, and how to use it. So it's like a weird sort of stylistic commentary, I believe, about how Control V and how writing on a computer itself changes the nature of poetry. Because when you can cut things off, when you can select them and cut them, it does change the way that you write. I don't know. Am I going too far? I don't care. It's kind of hot in here. Whew. Wearing this sweater. The sweater keeps riding up on me. I can't stop it from doing that. Okay. The next track is probably my favorite. If you had to listen to one track on the album, I would say listen to Diogenes on the Auction Block. Now this is the thing. For an album which is at least partly about the black experience and blackness, you would think that a song that talks about slavery right off the bat would be about that. I don't think it necessarily is. See, in order to understand this song, you have to understand Diogenes himself. Figure of philosophical interest in ancient Greece, somebody who like lived in a little like tub. He was homeless. He was constantly making fun of the government. He was making fun of money. He was getting kicked out of everywhere he went. He made fun of Plato. He was just running around being a complete punk who was very consciously trying to be free of society. He was considered one of the fathers of cynicism, like seeing things and criticizing them. And he believed very much in the values of poverty, just of not having things and of being free. I think in that way, and I've done a little diagram here, I think that we could realistically have some kind of little like triad here of Diogenes, Kaufman, and Ferreira, where they're all trying to do basically the same thing, have a cynical understanding knowledge of things, be apart from society, comment on it. But what happened to Diogenes was he was sold into slavery. And this is what's funny, is that he's actually quoted right here. Like this is a quote. Well, a rough quote. I am the type of slave you buy if you need a new master. So when Diogenes, who actually formerly owned slaves in his own life, when Diogenes was sold into slavery, he said, they said, what are you good at? And he said, I'm good at being a master. Okay? So this is like a very conscious times of understanding, of like trying to understand and play with this figure of Diogenes. This kind of anti-hero, this somewhat misanthropic, poetic, understanding, cynical hero, like Bob Kaufman. What's cool here too is that he sings along with this slowed down sample, and there's just a very funky beat. The more I listen to the music, the more I realize I could do a whole nother video just about the music. What I think is nice here is in the second verse, he does a lot of nice kind of, poetic resonance, mind mired and diamond fire, lots of nice kind of like sounds that are echoing. But then he makes a political stance. He makes a Diogenesian comment on society and how silly it is and how there's no difference between the different political parties. Political spectrum be Sprite or Sierra Mist. It's disgusting. This is great. Let me just have a little bit of my Joe Cool coffee. This is really great. So he's saying the political spectrum, so Sprite and Sierra Mist are both citrusy sodas, which are basically identical, and people swear are different, but are not. Think Coke and Pepsi being the same. So political spectrum be Sprite or Sierra Mist, it's disgusting. But what's cool here is he's doing something, which great poets do, which is anchoring the ancient and the modern, right? Like putting them together. So you can talk about Diogenes, and let's talk about Diogenes, let's talk about someone who died thousands of years ago, and let's mix it together with the modern, much like Baudelaire did. This is a very important technique for writing poetry that is eternal and contemporary at the same time, and that's what he's doing. This is a perfect point. Political spectrum, be Sprite or Sierra Mist, it's disgusting. Because also, Sprite and Sierra Mist are disgusting. Robust hustling isn't the answer, but we all know. Suddenly wise, enveloped in green success. Smoke screens, nerve-wracked suspicion of a newer song, afterwards dancing. My hair is curling in anticipation of my own wild gardening. Hot commodity, daughter prodigies. You know the answer isn't rapping. You know the answer isn't rapping. You know the answer isn't rapping, but let's listen to another song. So this is the ultimate problem, which is how engaged should an artist be? Should an artist be politically engaged or not? If you recognize that everything is Sprite or Sierra Mist, what is your role? How do you fix things? Is it your job to make things better or not? But let's listen to another song. He just gives up on this debate, which is the only thing you can do with this debate, and just goes on to another song. Red Guard Snipers. I'm going to go through this one kind of quickly. I love the beat on this, a cool kind of vaporwave sound, but there's a guest rapper, SB The More, and as you can see here, not for this album. I'm not interested in what anyone else other than R.A.P. Ferreira is trying to say. Now listen, I'm not saying it's a bad song, I'm saying it doesn't fit for me on this album. Please feel free to put in the comments the ways that I'm wrong. I will say that R.A.P. Ferreira's last lines on here, he talks about that's the power of creation. And of course, the word poetry itself is tied into the word for to create, right? That's the etymological origin of poetry. So, okay. But then we get to Sips of Ripple Wine, another masterpiece on this album, probably my second favorite track on here. And Ripple wine, is very cheap wine that's usually drunk by, alcoholics on the street. It's often just associated with hobos and street people who are trying to get drunk as cheap as possible. So the first line of this unveils another contradiction in poetry. Sippin' Beaujolais Lipple. Okay, so what he's doing here, he's mixing Ripple and Beaujolais. So Beaujolais is a French wine region known in particular around November for its new wines. It's very rare to be known for new wines, but still mixing together a terroir from France and a American street wine is very much of what this ideal is of rap and poetry, of the high and the low coming together. And his paradoxical place in this of using street music, right? Like music that comes from the street, and imbuing it with poetry, which has unfortunately been largely relegated to eggheads like myself in macademia. I call it that from now on. Sippin' Beaujolais Lipple, laughin' as the bougie try to scribe a riddle. That's me. I'm the bougie trying to scribe the riddle. I'm the bougie person who's listening to this music, who's taking it super seriously and trying to understand it, trying to decipher it. This is why this is why poetry needs rap. Because now jazz is no longer a seditious art form for, the forgotten people in America. That has now become as high and highfalutin as poetry itself. So jazz and poetry exist in the same place. Jazz and poetry is not Beaujolais Lipple anymore. It used to be Beaujolais Lipple. Now, in order to be Beaujolais Lipple, it has to be rap and poetry. Beautiful, the music here, very low-key, like just bass and like a hint of a drum. It's very nice here. And then there's an interlude. And this whole point that I've been making about rap and poetry really comes into focus here. This is going to be a long-ass video. It's okay. That's what I do. So, there's an interlude with someone named Ted Jones, who was another poet, who was another kind of beat poet, who wrote about how jazz was his religion. That's what he was most famous for. And the clip, I found the clip where this comes from. I tracked it down on YouTube. And Ted Jones is speaking in a documentary, a Dutch documentary. Isn't that weird? A Dutch documentary called Jazz and Poetry, which is another reason why I think we could subtitle this Rap and Poetry. And so he says this is a poem dedicated to all the poets all over the world. I think what's important here is its intentional interjection of this documentary, which is putting forth this idea of the relationship between a form of music and poetry. He's going to come back later, but this breaks it up, then comes into the second verse, which has kind of like a weird warbled guitar, which is quite nice. Now listen. Charitable wallets, screams are stereophonic. Marcellus Wallace with them pipe-hittin' N-words, getting ready to go medieval, hopscotchin' the grassy cannoles like Knievel. Poetically, I love hopscotching cannoles like Knievel, mixing in Evel Knievel and grassy knolls, playing around with words, the way they look, the way they sound. But here's a reference to the character, played by Ving Rhames in Pulp Fiction, Marcellus Wallace. Marcellus Wallace? So this is the second time on this album that we have a very contemporary reference, a very rap-like simile, okay? I'm like this like that. Okay, which is great and part of the rap lexicon, but doesn't really fit in with the larger, strictly poetic attitude of most of this album. So what do we have here? We have two examples. The first one, Rasheed Wallace, a basketball player. Okay. Second one, Marcellus Wallace, a movie gangster. I might be going too far here. But what does it mean that they're both last name of Wallace? It turns out Bob Kaufman was not entirely politically disengaged. He was politically engaged. As a matter of fact, when he took that vow of silence, it was after JFK was murdered. He was a big fan of JFK. And in the 40s, in 1948, he worked for a very progressive politician. Okay, think, the way we think of Bernie Sanders now, okay? And the name of that politician was Henry Wallace. I don't know if this is coincidental. I don't think it possibly can be. This R.A.P. Ferreira guy is wicked, wicked smart. I'm saying that as a former Bostonian, not as someone who's patronizing Mainers. He is wicked smart. I believe he knows what he's doing. I think this is a reference that we're supposed to follow. Why is it Wallace? And that's why. I should have asked him that and not for his recipe for oatmeal cookies. But I can't help it. Some more kind of societal comments on here. Too busy earning medals for killing children. Very politically knowledgeable. And then this is a fascinating omission. So part of this album is like a crash course in very interesting, primarily African-American cultural figure, under-acknowledged cultural figures in American culture, okay? I said the word culture 3 times in one sentence. Doesn't matter. So Ted Jones comes back. Joans, by the way. And the same quote from the same jazz and poetry video from the Dutch. And he says, if you should see a man walking down the crowded street, talking aloud to himself, don't run in the opposite direction, but run towards him, for he is a poet. You have nothing to fear from the poet. And then he cuts it. R.A.P. Ferreira, Scallops Hotel, cuts it. Why? I don't know. Because the next line is, you have nothing to fear from the poet, but the truth. I don't know. I think it's implied. I think that the idea that what you're going to get at is the truth is implied. Maybe he wants to stay away from a word as loaded as the truth. I don't know why. I should have asked him why did he cut that out instead of recipe for oatmeal cookies. Whatever oatmeal cookie recipe he would have given me would have been better than these. Really, really dry. Our next song is called Strength. And I don't know if this is like an intentional misspelling of the word strength. I don't know. I sort of assume that it is, which is actually a little bit like what Langston Hughes would do, before the Beats arrived, of sort of taking misspellings and using them and sort of making misspellings official and canonized. This has another intro from another poet, another Black American poet who's undervalued, Amiri Bakara, who apparently was the person who introduced Ginsberg to Langston Hughes. That was probably an interesting dinner. And this whole beginning of Skrenth is him talking about how, as a beat poet, he was trying to do what rap is doing. So he's doing what my dear thesis commentator was doing, saying, hey, it's rap, but it's true that beat poets were trying to do a lot of what rap artists were trying to do, take music and mix it together with some kind of street poetry. Further emphasizing the idea that this entire album is a meditation and a support of the idea that rap and poetry should be well linked. Not to help rap. Rap doesn't need any help at all. Rap doesn't need any justification. It is the most popular music in the entire world, and especially in America. But maybe rap can help poetry a little bit. Kind of cool music here. Sounds like a tense scene in a 70s like TV detective drama. Another quote from another poet, Gregory Corso, this time not a black poet. I don't think that those figures who were chosen because they were black. I think that a lot of what they were saying echoes a lot of what Ferreira is trying to say and a lot of what Bob Kaufman's trying to say. And here it's sort of talking about how you can't choose to be a poet. You just are. You have to be. If you are a poet, you have to be. That's fine. Next track is called Bobby Digital's Little Wings. So Bobby Digital is the pseudonym for the RZA, the producer for the Wu-Tang Clan, and that was his sort of solo albums, which are okay, kind of interesting, a little bit more avant-garde, doing a lot of interesting things, especially with feedback. If you've never listened to Bobby Digital's albums, they are simultaneously disappointing and amazing. I think it's Bobby Digital. I think he's talking about Bob Kaufman in the digital age. I don't think he's actually trying to make a reference to the RZA, but I think it's also a reference to the RZA. The sample changes, but at the beginning it sounds kind of like an Eastern raw sample that he might have. What's nice here is there's a little detail where he talks about talking to his kid. Asking my son, are you having fun yet? He grins loudly, how his granny did. We black as some mission figs. So what's beautiful here is this idea of like asking your son if you're having fun and then seeing the smile and connecting that smile to someone who he's related to. I think that, I don't know, my wife has the same smile as her grandmother. It's like unreal. To the point where we call her grandmother Smiley Baba, Smiley Grandmother in Serbian. And it's this amazing like little detail. Like this whole album is so heady and wise and far out there that there's just this one little personal detail that makes me feel like this guy is like a good father, that he cares about like family and connection, and just this whole line, are you having fun yet? He grins loudly, how his granny did. We be black as some mission figs, tying in, the skin color, but also the smiles, this kind of hereditary thread that's going through this song. Flourishing future to past, and what the mission is, remain unashamed to be sensitive, as such is the first stage of vigilance. So this is arguing in favor of sensitivity, because sensitivity is the first stage of vigilance. So it's funny because it is true. Sensitivity is not something that is highly prized in rap music, right? In general, toughness is preferred over sensitivity. But what's fascinating here is taking sensitivity and pointing out that if you're not sensitive, you're not vigilant, right? If you don't feel something on your hand, you might not know it's a spider, a black widow spider that can bite your hand. You have to be sensitive to be vigilant. It's beautiful. And it's also a lesson that he's giving to his son. So it's just great. I don't know how it fit in here. It goes out with an interlude by someone named Shay Stewart Booley. Looking up, she is in charge of an organization called Black Girl in Maine, which I suppose is about the difficulty of living in a part of America that's very rural and very white as a person of color. It's part of this whole constellation of figures that dot this album. They're just these very interesting figures that sort of really open up. Like this album, if you go into it as deeply as I have for the last couple of days, it opened me up to a lot of different things. Not just beat poetry, but a lot of these different possibilities and experiences which are underrepresented in culture and society. On the outro, they make a direct reference to negritude. See Aimé Césaire up there. I have a whole video about the rap album Dave by Dave, Psychodrama. I'll put that up here. It's one of my better videos where I talk about the relationship between rap and negritude, and in particular international rap and negritude. I would like, if you made it 40 minutes into this video, do me a favor and watch that video. I think it's one of my better ones. Next track is called Listening. It's kind of funny here, like he makes another one of these lines that's sort of like a simile. Al Gore, allegory, and Allegheny with a pocket torch. I don't know what it means. I can't tell. You stumped me. If somebody knows what that means, please put it in the comments. I'm afraid I'm stuck like I am with Rimbaud, just going like, I'm sure it means something, but I don't know what it is. Now he makes another reference here. My shit be Ismail Reed reading receipts with a 3-piece in a 3-piece. Your shit be feces, note the difference, and plan accordingly. So, I think this is an intentional, okay, I don't know, but this east sound makes me think, I'm going way too far here. This is wrong. Just ignore what I'm about to say. But this seems to me to be an intentional, like, rhyming quote of the Notorious B.I.G., I make your mouth pee so beast like Delarice. Reading receipts with a 3-piece in a 3-piece. I don't know. Maybe it's just that I like that line. It's one of my favorite lines in rap history, but it's tied in together. Now, am I going to go even further and mention that Notorious B.I.G.'s real name is Christopher Wallace? No. That's too far even for me. It's true, but it's true, but it's pointless. Which could also be the tagline under most academic papers. Cool kind of piano futzing playing on here, like the sample's very kind of just loosely played here. He talks about the joy of an aimless life, going back to this concept of Diogenes and of Bob Kaufman himself. And then at the end, he just sings. Then I remind myself, it is in fact all good. And he sings along with the piano that's playing what sounds like random notes. And I remind myself, it's all good. Very nice, sing-songy and catchy. He does have the ability to make very engaging melodies. It doesn't seem to be what he wants, right? Like, his emphasis doesn't appear to be about, like, flow and rhymes. It really seems to be this poetic message, but he can do it. The outro is all about the oral tradition and about the nature of teaching, and I don't know who said it. So if you know that, please tell me who does the outro to the song Listening. High Rise in Newark has kind of a vapor wavy sound. At times, the music sounds kind of vapor wavy. I think this is the best flow on the album for him as a rapper. Let's up the ante, hamstring cut from the runaway audacity that make you antsy. You start ampersanding life's accomplishments. Just he has kind of a really nice flow here. He also ends up kind of going into sort of nonsense words, like nonsense words that come from rap vernacular. Off the dilly-dally on the humble bumble with the whoomty-whoomp. It happens every day. Kaufman also, in his poetry, would sometimes go to sort of babyish sounds. There was a previous reference to the Dada movement of poetry and art. This is kind of a Dada thing of just having weird random sounds that sound babyish but are also important at the same time. And he sings again at the end here. There's a whole break, a kind of De La Soul-ish beat comes in, and he starts singing about like his life and about spirits clinging to theoretical lives, which is how he describes stars, as spirits clinging to theoretical lives. He says the line, I won't be watching Dancing with the Stars this evening. I'll probably be busy watching the stars this evening. So I don't know. Who is it that are the spirits clinging to theoretical lives? The people dancing in Dancing with the Stars or the stars themselves? Rejoice starts off with kind of a reggae sound. It's kind of nice, very dreamy soundscape here. This appears to be mostly about the state of the poet, like what is a poet and how does a poet live these days. You know where the poet is, at the perfume store in the buffet line, on a philosophical corner, drawing sevens in concrete. You know where the poet is, off riding green horses, profaning the inevitable but never on purpose, lips pursed in verses, spitting juice like plums do. Ooh, that ish delicious. So it seems to be about like, where is the poet? The poet is poor, the poet is well-read, the poet is sort of not anywhere, in all these kind of weird spaces. So I don't know. At times, I'm a little bit frustrated at how much this album is about the poet. I think it's fascinating, an album about poetry, but when it's just about the poet, it's a little bit solipsistic, a little bit like, what am I? That's maybe my one complaint about the entire album. Towards the end, he makes a completely off-kilter reference to the character Kano from Mortal Kombat. I think, was he in the first one? I know he was at least in 2 or 3. He's making reference to Laser Eye like Kano, which I believe is a move that came in with Mortal Kombat 3. Kano is a character in the video game, the violent video game, who shoots lasers out of his eyes. And I'm thinking, okay, what's up with this? And then the next person who he brings in from his whole cavalcade of guest stars, of interesting figures, interesting, mostly African-American, underappreciated figures of cultural significance, Milford Graves, who was like a drummer and a shaman and a healing person, who also was a martial artist, who talks about martial arts in this quote. So I think maybe that's connected because Kano was also a martial artist. I don't know. Then the album ends with the Abominist Manifesto. This is just him saying Bob Kaufman's Abominist Manifesto. None of these lyrics, as far as I can tell, are written by R.A.P. Ferreira. The music is just like these weird harmonics on bass with a haunting voice sample that comes in. Halfway through, a new sound comes in that's a little bit more like kind of a country western sound. But basically, he's just reading this. And this is a great example of Bob Kaufman's work. This is a wonderful poem, an amazing poem, very inscrutable, very difficult. It resists the kind of interpretation that macademics like me like to do, okay? Abomunists join nothing but their hands or legs or other same. Abomunists spit anti-poetry for reasons and frank. It goes on and on. Abomunists do not feel pain no matter how much it hurts. Okay, it's very funny. It seems as though a bombunist is like a mixture between like atom bomb and communist and abominable snowman and all these different things. Like if you were to say what is an abominist, there is no answer. I think that's part of the idea that Bob Kaufman is trying to describe who he is by making a manifesto that doesn't entirely make sense. Because in this tradition of Diogenes and R.A.P. Ferreira, tradition that hadn't continued yet, is like we have these beliefs, and they're not all completely silly. Like there is a meaning to it. This isn't just like, a bombunist believes that bicycles are made out of noodles. Like it's not like that. Like all these things mean something, but it's very difficult to pin down. And it does what a lot of great poetry does. You know what it means, but you can't quite explain it. Interestingly, there's a couple of times where R.A.P. Ferreira takes things out of the Abominist Manifesto. He skips the line about Abomunists believe the solution to the problems of religious bigotry is to have a Catholic candidate for president and a Protestant candidate for pope. So this was written when JFK was running for president, and he was a Catholic, and that was scandalous to most of the country. So that was that comment. I suppose that's why he's taking it out. It's funny because R.A.P. Ferreira can't even, I don't blame him. I'm not going to be able to pronounce this either. But he reads this one line and takes a long time to produce this last word. Abominist children must be reared abominably. He does it better than I do it, but I like that he left it in the way that it is. A lot of this album feels very much like you're in a concert hall, you're in a coffee house, you're in a room, you're somewhere, much like an intimate jazz setting, intimate rap setting, and he's not going to re-record this just because it took him a while to say abominably, because it's some word that Bob Kaufman made up. Abomunists never compromise their rejectionary philosophy. Abomunism's main function. Wait a minute. I'm actually not going to get there yet. Let's look at where this goes here, okay? So right here, we have Abomunists never compromise their rejectionary philosophy. Again, I think that's where we're really in line with Diogenes here. And then the final line, Abomunists reject everything except snowmen. I find this to be the funniest line. I love this line, and R.A.P. Ferreira took it out. Why? I don't know. What he then goes on to do is sort of excerpt different parts from the rest of the manifesto, not reading it straight out like he did the main part. There's a whole series of like 4 or 5 pages with just more of this kind of weird, scattered, barely cohesive thinking. And this is where he quotes, "Abominus' main function is to unite the soul with oatmeal cookies." That is why R.A.P. Ferreira has been talking about oatmeal cookies. And that presumably is why he didn't give me a recipe. Because he doesn't know the recipe. Bob Kaufman knows the recipe. So what does this oatmeal cookie represent? I don't know. Well, not this oatmeal cookie. This oatmeal cookie is very dry and unenjoyable. But what do oatmeal cookies represent in this work and in the Abominus Manifesto? I think it's representative of something pure and good, something that you can make for yourself, something that is like fulfilling and enjoyable, but is kind of outside of the ambitions of stardom, the ambitions of greatness, of eternity, the ambitions of being wealthy or of being famous. If you can just sit down and just eat an oatmeal cookie, and I invite you to do this. Seriously, do it. Make an oatmeal cookie and listen to this album. It's very enjoyable. Even if it's not a very good oatmeal cookie, it's a very enjoyable experience. I think that's what this is. Abominism's main function is to unite the soul with oatmeal cookies. Like to unite ourselves with this kind of purity and goodness that is outside of society that we can create for ourselves. Other things that are outside of society that we can create for ourselves include music and poetry. Kind of goes on and on, says, Abominus poetry, in order to be completely understood, should be eaten. So I think this album is also supposed to be eaten, kind of like this cookie. Like eaten. When you eat something, you don't hold on to it forever. You eat it, you poop it out, and then it's done. You know, much like Marcel Duchamp and his theories of art, or much like Bob Kaufman not writing down his poetry, it should be eaten. It shouldn't be preserved, put on the wall, studied by some weirdo in his rumpus room, okay? Just goes on, and it ends with, we're on to you. We're on to you, we're on to you. So there you go. There are my notes on R.A.P. Ferreira's album, Bob's Son. I very much appreciate this. Thank you to the auditor who suggested that I review this. I forget your name, but I appreciate it. And thank you all to those who stayed here. I realize I don't ask people to subscribe a lot, and it would be nice if you did. It's nice. But I think more importantly, I would appreciate it if you watch another one of my videos, because all my videos are like this, where I try to say something interesting, and I try to go deeper than just like, you know, it was good, it was bad. So just give another one of my videos a shot. I don't know, maybe one will pop up here. Okay, well, I am going to finish eating this cookie. It's actually really not that bad. It's actually pretty good. I'm gonna finish eating my cookie and probably go back to reading more about Bob Kaufman. There's the camera.